Hello and welcome to our podcast number 2. I'm John Donoghue, and with me today is author, channeler, medium and bioenergy therapist Patricia Hessnan. We have had a number of questions from viewers who would like to find out more about subjects which we'll be discussing here today. And let me first ask you, Patricia, what is a panic attack and how would you describe it? And more importantly, how would you recognize if you were experiencing a panic attack?
A panic attack can start suddenly, without warning. There may be no lead up to it. Something or some event may trigger a panic attack, where this person may have had a shock or trauma in the past and it hasn't been resolved or dealt with. A panic attack can feel like you're losing your mind, you're losing control. You can have chest pains, your heart can be racing, breathing difficulties, you feel you cannot get enough of breath. Now, always remember, chest pains can also be a serious condition, so don't just accept that chest pains are a panic attack. Panic attacks, again, can occur in young children. And the symptoms of panic in young children can be anything from nightmares, bedwetting, screaming in the middle of the night. There's numerous reasons for panic attacks.
And how often would somebody have or experience a panic attack? Is it something you have once and that's the end of it? Or is it something that's likely to be occurring again and again for a particular reason?
Some people can have panic attacks on a daily basis. Some people may have panic attacks on a weekly basis. For others, they may just have one occurrence of a panic attack. There doesn't seem to be any regular way of describing why or how often a panic attack may occur.
And what's likely to bring on a panic attack?
Well, again, a person will say that could have been, as I said in my last podcast, I was trapped in a house fire. I got trapped in a lift that broke down years later, and that brought back the panic, even though the intensity of it had been resolved. But being trapped in the lift, I felt, oh God, I can't get out of here. I have to get out of here. All rationale goes out the window.
And can children suffer from panic attacks?
Children can. We had a particular incident of a very young girl that came for therapy, and the doctors could not decide what was causing these outbursts of nightmares and panic in the middle of the night. And what would happen, she would go to bed at a regular hour and wake up in the middle of the night screaming. Initially, when she was 4 or 5 years of age, it was manageable. She was constantly bedwetting. It was still manageable, but when she got to 12 or 13 years of age, the parents were having difficulty trying to manage it, because what she was doing, she was leaving the house. These people were living in the country, running around the fields, screaming and roaring, until the parents went out, consoled her, got her back in again, got her back into bed. But it had become progressively worse. So the parents decided to bring her for energy therapy, just as probably a last resort. And when she was lying on the therapy table, the first session, she would bend her knees and pull herself up into the fetal position on the therapy table. And she stayed in that position throughout the full duration of the therapy session. The second session was similar. As soon as she would relax, she'd gather herself up into a ball and stay in that position until the session was complete. On the third session, She was in the fetal position when all of a sudden she stretched herself out, and then jumped up and sat up straight, looked round her and lay down and went back to sleep again. Now, I had asked her mother, did anything happen during her pregnancy? And the mother had said no, nothing that she could remember. But before we started the third session, the mother said an event did happen, but she didn't think it would have much relevance on these panic attacks. So what she said was the family were going on a day's outing, and the mother was about 5 months pregnant. She was sitting in the front of the car and her husband was driving. So they're driving down a very, very narrow country lane when they met a herd of cattle. Now the lane was very, very narrow and there was a lot of cattle, so there was really no room for the cattle to get past the car. The farmer didn't see the car in the distance, so he was trying to push the cattle along and speed them up. But what happened, one of the cattle, the cows, or whichever was a bullock or a cow, got distressed and jumped on the bonnet of the car on the side that the mother was sitting. The mother got an incredible shock. Now, the animal didn't break the window, but it cracked it. So the force of the animal's head cracked the window. So of course the mother got an incredible shock. She said she couldn't see how that could have such a relevance on her child's nightmares and bedwetting and so on. But following that session, it all stopped. The bedwetting stopped, the nightmares stopped, the panic stopped, went completely.
What stage of pregnancy was that lady when this incident occurred?
She said she was approximately 5 months.
Okay. So is it your opinion that although the experience was something felt by the mother, that the baby inside at 5 months old was also picking up on the shock that the mother was experiencing? Is that?
I do feel that because of when the child would come for therapy, it would contract back into the fetal position and stay in that position for the full duration of the therapy session. Now, I was working on a shock factor, that there was some shock, still not knowing what had happened. So I do believe that the baby absorbed the shock.
At what stage did the mother recognize that there was something not quite right health-wise with her daughter?
Well, it had started when she was quite young. She used to wake up 2 or 3 screaming in the middle of the night, and of course she wouldn't have been dry at night, maybe till 3 or 4. The bedwetting then, that was persistent. But the nightmares, possibly coming into puberty, change in hormones, and because she couldn't have sleepovers, and it was like she was trying to keep the panic at bay. So when she got into bed and would relax, it just erupted, the panic. So she had to get out and round the fields she'd go.
It's interesting that she'd want to get out. Would that be in any way related to the baby inside of the womb and this incredible sensation of all, something happening around me, I want to get out of here? Would the baby perhaps be actually recognizing that they were confined and imprisoned in this?
Yeah, it's quite possible, because as the mother would have contracted, the baby would have felt the contraction around itself.
Right. Yeah.
And even though the mother didn't get hit, it was the sudden jolt, and it was the mother's contraction with shock when the animal hit the windscreen.
Okay. And how is this shock, how does a shock continue? Personally, I would have thought that if you get a shock, then you get the shock at that particular point in time, and that's the end of it. But obviously it's not. Obviously this shock is retained someplace in the body? Is it in the energy field, in the aura? Is it within the physical body, or where is it retained afterwards?
Well, the root chakra would be considered, or base chakra would be considered the chakra for mortal fear, near-death experiences, severe shock or trauma. So when somebody has a severe shock, they literally can have an outer body experience because it's too painful. They can't cope with the pain, they can't cope with the shock. So if you get a really serious cut, initially you don't feel anything. It's only when the body starts to heal and you look at it, do you realize the extent of the wound. So it's the extent of the shock. The body has an automatic brake system. It cannot cope, so it shuts down on all levels. So like the physical body will shut down in order to heal. The emotional and mental body has to shut down in order to heal, or else it would die.
So it must be registered at some level. I know that I fell off a ladder once, and it was quite a traumatic experience and quite a shock for me. And years later, I can still go back into that memory. I can go back in, and every time I think about falling off the ladder, I actually freeze. I can actually sense it and feel it again. So it must, that feeling of that shock must be registered someplace in my own body at that stage.
Well, if you can remember it, it is not as intense as if when you can't remember it. You see, if it's so severe trauma and shock can be blocked to such a level that it's not accessible to the conscious mind.
So you mentioned that this young girl came for energy therapy. So how would the energy therapy have helped this young lady if it's not registered in the conscious mind? Are you saying that bioenergy as a therapy helps to release something that's in the subconscious?
I wouldn't say it's any energy therapy is going to release something from the subconscious. What it does, it decreases the intensity of it, and then it becomes a memory rather than a crippling emotion. So it doesn't actually get rid of it. As I said in my last podcast, I saw how ether abreaction was used to access the subconscious memory when energy therapy was never heard of. And what was in the subconscious was brought to the conscious mind, where it could be dealt with and processed through counselling or talking it through.
Okay, so in the case of this young lady who had this intense shock still in her system, did you find that gradually the intensity that was occurring in her body was starting to decrease? She still obviously had the memory, or did she have a memory at all in her case?
Interestingly enough, in her case, it was like in very deep energy work, you can have what's called myoclonic jerks, and that is an energy release. So it's when you increase the pressure from one point to another. If you turn on the tap onto the hose and the hose is blocked, you increase the pressure from the water through the hose. When the water gets through the other end, it gives a bit of a wriggle. Now, you may never know what blocked the hose, but the water is running freely. So for this young girl, she didn't have any conscious recall of what happened. But when she suddenly straightened herself out and jumped up on the table, it would have been like a flashback. Now that would have happened on numerous occasions where somebody would have been in a very serious car accident and they had no memory of the incident, and they would have panic attacks about sitting into the car, driving. But during the session, when the body gives a release or lets go, it's just like a little jerk, and then the energy runs freely. So she had no recall, but she was fine. It all stopped. The bedwetting stopped. The nightmares stopped.
So you're saying that the myoclonic jerks is a visual way that the therapist sees that something has released, like a nut on the hose in your garden, and water won't come out, but when you unravel the nut, the water shoots out on the
Yes,
other
and
end.
it's not. You don't always see it. As I said, sometimes when you are working, sometimes when I'm working, I would have my eyes closed. Sometimes I would actually see the incident and how it happened. That's another day's work. But it's not always visible, but you do notice where there's incredible intensity of energy between one hand and it's going through the chakra to the other hand. So there's incredible intensity, and it's like like having your hand on top of a fountain, and all of a sudden it goes, it's gone. You're thinking, oh, where's that gone? It's gone. It's dissipated.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my head around the idea of a nut in a hose. I can visualize that. I've seen it in a practical sense, and unravel the nut from a hose, and the water flows. In the case of the human body, are you saying that it's like a nut that actually happens in the energy field that's there, that you need to unravel that nut at an energy level from the person's body to release the intensity?
Yeah, funny enough, I would describe it in the energy field when you have this, you run into this bump. And to me, when I would be working, it would be like a golf ball. And we'll say football is that size, with contraction and contraction and contraction of shock, accidents, the muscles and all around it have gone down to the size of a golf ball. When you release that knot, or you're calling it knot, the golf ball, it's like it all dissipates, so there's no intensity in it.
Right. So a golf ball is actually, when I was young, I took a golf ball apart, and it is quite compressed. But when you actually cut a golf ball apart, it's full of elastic bands, and it just opens up and up and up and up. It can be that size when it opens. So that's what you're saying.
So it dissipates back.
It dissipates and it releases.
Yeah.
And is there anything that, we'll say, to just go back to your earlier statement, how would somebody recognize if they're going through this sensation at the moment, and they're trying to identify it? I mean, I take it they've gone to their GP or a counsellor, and they've discussed this with a number of people in the area of health. How would they recognize that what they're actually experiencing is a panic attack? How can they identify it in themselves?
Sometimes the person comes for therapy, and sometimes it is quite, they do have a flashback, they do have a memory. And if you can find the cause, you have the cure. Because if you can decrease the intensity of the cause, you have the cure. Some people may not have any idea where it started, no idea at all. And it's interesting when you say, when they have the flashback, how do they deal with it? If it's a very, very young child, there's always self-blame. Whether it's abuse, no matter what it is, there's self-blame. They don't know how to differentiate between what is their fault and what is the fault of the culprit. And you find children, will say, that may have been bullied. One young lad I had for therapy, he was bullied in school, but what the older boys did, they didn't actually hit him, they didn't say anything to him, they surrounded him and wouldn't let him get loose. Everywhere he went, he was trapped. Now, they didn't touch him, but he was only about 6 or 7, and his feelings of panic would be in social occasions, in discos, in at football matches where there's a crowd, and if the crowd, were gathered around him, he would panic. Now, people can say, well, that wasn't such a big deal, but the child was only 6 or 7. That's what's different. So it depends on the age of the person when an incident occurred.
Okay, so for the sake of people who are watching this at the moment, the panic, for a start, for them to go back to my earlier question, excuse me, to recognize that they are actually having a panic attack. How would you describe the feeling that they're having so they can say, what I'm having right now is a panic attack? It's not just worry about something, I'm actually having a panic attack. How would you describe what a panic attack feels like to a person so somebody can recognize, this is, I'm having a panic attack. This is something related to an event or a trauma in my life.
A panic attack is not normal worry. It's not worry about an exam. It's not worry about going to town. A panic attack it's like what it is, blind panic. I can't go there. I can't do that. I can't stay here. I have to get out. I have to do this. And the pulse is racing. It's a physiological situation. It's not just in the head. A panic attack is not in your head because your body is responding to the panic. So when people recognize, oops, I'm having a panic attack. A friend of mine had a panic attack while she was driving, and she had incredible chest pains, and she was rushed into A&E thinking it was a heart attack. It was a panic attack. So what people do, once they discover, yes, I do have panic attacks. And some people will have a panic attack when they're on a stage in front of a large audience. They have a panic attack, but they can go out and play a game of football, and because they're physically doing something, they don't have a panic attack. So there is no definite way of knowing I'm having a panic attack. The way of knowing is I'm not coping. I have to get out of here. I'm losing my mind. I'm going to die. I'm going to die if I stay here. And it's like when we got trapped in the lift, the first thing is you think, I'm going to die. But you're not going to die. There's loads of people around. There's no logic to panic. There is no logic to it at all, because all you feel is, I'm going to die. I'm going to lose my mind. I have to get out of here. People go for therapy. And sometimes in therapy, especially with deep energy work, people can find the actual cause or the intensity of the initial incident is decreased, and the panic then eases. But they don't know why the panic eases. But then it's like anything. It's like having a toothache. You're kind of wondering, where is it gone if it's not there today? But you can't get the intensity back into it.
Okay, so this is where we say, coming back to that young boy who at 6 years of age was surrounded by older boys or bigger boys, and he experienced at that stage the panic of not being able to get away and not being free to move. So this then would affect him all his life. This would affect him every time he's surrounded by a crowd or in a crowded room. The memory of him as a 6-year-old, does that mean he reverts back in his head to being a 6-year-old again, realizing that, I mean, after all, he's an adult now. He can walk through the crowd, he can walk out the door, but does he revert back to the young boy in his head again?
It's to remember, it's a child that suppressed the emotion. It's an adult that's dealing with it. But that is like saying to somebody in the middle of a panic attack that has gone into the deep end of the swimming pool and they're drowning, you'll be fine. You can get out of it. That's no good. When the person is in the panic, that's when they need the support. It may be a child that suppressed it and it's an adult that's dealing with it, but that takes therapy to bring, and no matter how much you talk somebody through it, it doesn't necessarily work because it's stuck at an energy level. It's the memory of the child that's triggered, not the adult.
So I'm just thinking of somebody who has a fear of flying, for instance. Could that be a fear of enclosed spaces?
Oh yes, yeah.
It may not necessarily be the thought of a plane taking off, or would it be something like the sound of the plane, which is quite loud? It could have been a sound that they heard as a child that is now introducing this panic.
Well, the fear of enclosed spaces, I can identify with that because after my accident, I would sit on the plane and then I think, how am I going to get out of here? You know, so even though the intensity of what had happened to me was greatly decreased, to this day, I will sit on a plane and think, whoops, how do I get off this?
Okay.
There is no logic.
There's no logic to it.
No.
Okay. So what can somebody do, for instance, as a self-help technique? What can somebody do if they do feel that they may be suffering from panic attacks? Obviously, contact perhaps an energy therapist. But is there anything they can do at home themselves? Is there anything they can do to help release this or reduce the intensity of what they're going through? Can they do anything themselves?
There's many self-help techniques out now. I always found the diaphragmatic breathing long-term fantastic because it brings you back into the here and now. The past is history. The future is a possibility. I am here now, and to keep breathing into it, holding that space. Breathe in and hold the space. I found the diaphragmatic breathing brilliant. Energy therapy, deep energy work, does definitely help to decrease the intensity of it. Also, music, we'll say music that I am not very musical now, in the key of, we'll say, the solar plexus.
C, I believe, yes.
C. So anxiety, anger and fear are three emotions that can be stuck in the solar plexus. So the anxiety turns to anger, to fear, and round it goes. But any sort of music that will even create a subliminal message, it's to relax, relax. And then there are many, it's on the self-healing training, there's many self-healing techniques you can do with doing energy work through your own chakras. Obviously, it wouldn't be as, well, I wouldn't say not as powerful, but it would be like using your own battery to charge your own torch, where you could use somebody else's battery if it was them that was doing it. And those techniques can help. I would often have used the technique of working through the solar plexus. If I was anxious, I was lying in bed, or I was anxious about something that was to happen the next day, and I'd do energy flows through my own solar plexus,
Okay.
which I found beneficial.
And would you suggest that if somebody is concerned about their panic attacks, obviously they can go to a therapist, but working on using the diaphragmatic breathing, I understand that that's using your diaphragm to breathe. So as opposed to your normal breathing, you're breathing more deeply. Can you just demonstrate how you do that? I presume
You'd be breathing in through the nose.
In through the nose, deep breath down into the diaphragm. Okay.
And if possible, hold the count of 5 and exhale.
Okay. I've just done that. That actually is you can actually feel the release as you do that.
You can do it in the car, you're stuck in the traffic jam, do a few diaphragmatic breathing exercises, you're late for the bank, do a few breathing exercises, okay. You're in the queue for the bus and there's no sign of it, make use of the time.
Sitting in the car at your traffic lights.
Yes, sitting in the car and your spouse or whichever is going a little bit too fast, you can do your diaphragmatic breathing exercises, but it's to keep the shoulders down. You breathe into the diaphragm, you go. So imagine that this is the neck of a balloon Your tummy is the balloon. So you're breathing air down the neck of the balloon, expanding the balloon, and then you let it all back out again.
Okay, and just to remind our viewers, of course, that the self-help training program is available online, and if they contact healingcoursesonline.com, they'll find more information on this self-healing course. Well, that's a really good explanation there about panic attacks. It cleared it in my mind. Can I ask about overwhelm? Is overwhelm and panic attacks, is that just another term for panic attacks, or is overwhelm something completely different?
Some people would say there are similarities between overwhelm and panic. My feeling, my personal feeling on overwhelm is too much of anything. I can't take any more. It's like the bin is overflowing. Everything has been stuffed in, and I can't take any more. Too much responsibility, too much work, not enough time. It's just too much. No let up. From work to home to caring for family, friends, no let up. And then it can start with a feeling of exhaustion, that you're just feeling exhausted. You just don't feel you have much left to give. You're just tired. And then when somebody asks you to do something that you feel is just too much, you get this lump in your throat that you can't, it won't go up and it won't come up and it won't go down. And you can't actually express how you feel. So all of this, it's like the bin is overflowing, and you're just about managing to hold it all together. And then one day, overwhelm can be from too much good as too much bad, as we call it. So you could be in complete overwhelm and somebody says, you've won the lottery. And you could say, oh, not that on top of everything else. How am I going to deal with that? That's all too much. Do I have to start thinking about that? It sounds bizarre, but that's the level overwhelm can get to. So you can just imagine a bin, a big dustbin, and it's packed, jammed with rubbish. Rubbish. Everyone else's rubbish as well as your own. And then somebody comes along and they put in an empty milk carton and the lid blows off the bin. It's the last person that put the milk carton into the bin that gets the blame. There's not a thing at all about all the other rubbish that was in the bin. And you go into complete overwhelm. And the person will say to you, oh, for God's sake, cop yourself on. It's not that big of a deal. You know, what are you on about? I only asked you a question. They don't know how much that bin has been packed and packed and packed for years. And all they can see is, that's a bit unfair, you know. Somebody says, if you're in overwhelm, would you like a cup of tea? It's too much. Everything's too much. Food is too much. Family are too much. And it's interesting, coming up to Christmas, the amount of people that are already in overwhelm. They're buying food in case they have visitors. They're shopping in case they have visitors. They're preparing beds in case they have visitors. If the visitors turn up, they're already exhausted by the time they get there. Then we have the occasion where the visitors turn up unannounced. So now instead of having 10 people for dinner, there's 15 people for dinner. More trauma. But this person that's already in overwhelm can't cope. They just cannot cope. So what they start doing is using distractions. They might have a drink, a smoke, keep going, going. Nobody actually notices how desperate this person is until they actually collapse. They can get a cold or a flu, but they get well. We all do it. We get well. We do it again and again and again.
And what's going on for somebody when they take on too much like that? Is it that what they've done so far, they get a feeling inside that this overwhelm is coming on, but if they do something else, if they do something new, that distracts them for a while. But then that's adding more to this dustbin that you're talking about.
For a number of people, we have a great inability to say no. Enough is enough. No. And sometimes this is carried forward from childhood memories. Appreciate what you get, take what you get, don't refuse it, be nice to everyone, look after everyone, and you come last. And sometimes a child will have had an experience where they may have felt guilty or made to feel guilty, and they can spend their lives compensating. I remember an incident where this young lad came for therapy, but he was very close to one of his brothers, but I don't think they were twins, but they were very close in age. And they had been sent out to play. It's gone back about 50 years ago. And they were sent out to play, and outside in a farmyard, there would have been barrels of water. So they were climbing up on sticks or something and playing in the water. But the other brother fell in on top of his head into the barrel of water. And this little, only about 5 or 6, and this little fella, he didn't know what to do. But of course, when he went in and told his father that his brother was in the barrel, he was drowned, he was dead. And that man lived with that guilt all his life. He never got over it because he was always told it was your fault. You should have looked after your brother, it was your fault. And he overcompensated, never felt worthy, never felt he deserved anything. And then he would go into total overwhelm. He couldn't cope because he had no boundaries. He had no limits on what he would do because nobody said, it's not your fault. You've done enough. Let him off the hook. Nobody ever said that. And even though he was only a child, he still, as a child's mind is global, took on the responsibility. And this man, he would never get over it as such. But like his father was long gone at this stage, but he still believed he caused his young brother to drown.
Right. And does it often happen that young children feel the responsibility for what's happening around them and carry that through life?
What they do, a child's mind, well, this is sort of more scientifically accepted, that a child's mind up to the age of 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, depends on the culture, is global. So they believe they caused the wars. They believed they're the reason mum and dad are fighting. They believe they're the reason the dog got run over. Their mind is global until they reach an age then where they can differentiate between, wait a minute, I didn't cause that. But that's the way a child's mind works right up to that age. So we carry forward all these memories from childhood. You know, your mum comes home with a baby and the baby vanishes. The baby dies. Well, we must have done something because there is no baby anymore. But nobody ever says, it wasn't your fault. No, and nobody, well, especially in our years, would separate behaviour from the person, as in saying, what you've done is not right, but you're a good person.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because very often you'll hear cases where somebody is being blamed and you were wrong and that was incorrect and you're a bad person for doing that. But in actual fact, it's their behaviour that needs to be identified. It's not the person, but they can feel it. They can feel that there's something wrong with them, and they can have a guilt for the rest of their lives. But in actual fact, it's an event that happened, not necessarily them themselves.
Yes, and some people, when they cannot access the emotional pain, will inflict physical pain on themselves, like self-harming, because they cannot get in touch with the emotional pain. But the good thing about today's society, people do look beyond it's what is seen to be there and say, okay, there could have been a factor that caused this or started this. They're looking beyond what is there, as in saying, well, take this and go home and see how you get on. You know, so in that way it's changed. And for Overwhelm, it's like people learning. You can say no. You're not a bad person because you said no. You are a good person to know your limitations. You're not a bad person to say no. You're not a bad person if you can't facilitate all the neighbours and bringing them for shopping and looking after the grandchildren every weekend and then collapsing when they're gone home. I'm only saying as grandchildren because I have grandchildren. But everyone does it.
Yeah. And why do people do that? I mean, they have difficulty saying no, and learning to say no is very important. But, you know, some people say, well, I don't like to let the person down, and they'll take on their own shopping and the shopping for the neighbours, and they'll pick up kids from school, and they'll take on a second job that night, minding somebody. Say, oh, I didn't want to let them down, I didn't want to say no. But then that person goes into, is this what we're talking about? They go into overwhelm at a certain stage where they can't take any more of anything from anybody. But what's the reason why somebody will, are they overcompensating, as you said earlier on? Why will they take on more and more and more, adding more to their load that they already have?
Well, say in our culture, the more you did, the better the person you were. You wouldn't dare say no anyway. But if you said no, you were a lesser person. The more you could do, you were seen to be the better person. And if you could succeed more than the neighbour's children, then you were a better person. This is how society would see you. So to say no meant you weren't able. And we never learned to say, I choose not to do it. We learned to say, I'm not able to do it. So then, what if we become sick, we're able to say, I'm not able to do it. Well, then we're not bad. We don't feel bad. We were sick. But if we say, I'm not doing it, then we consider ourselves to be bad people.
Yeah, and of course, if you say, anything you say after I am, and if you say, I am not able, then a message, I presume, is sent to the brain that you're no good and you're incapable, rather than saying, I choose not to. So at any stage you have a choice.
Yes.
But we very often give in to people, don't we? And we give in and we say, all right, okay, I'll do it. And then you're resenting it inside of your head because you know well that this is too much for you, but you'll still do it.
You'll still do it, but then we have what we would call our emotional piano players. They know the key to press to get the desired reaction.
These are other people who press your buttons.
Yeah. So it's like you, at a certain stage, before you go into the overwhelm, find out, like, who presses my buttons? Who gets the desired results by saying X, Y, and Z? And as long as, we'll say like a piano, I can't play a piano, but say play a piano, and as you play, some noise comes out of it, you get a reaction. Supposing you took all those pieces out from under the keys and removed them. Well, they can play away as long as they like, but nothing's going to happen. So it's for you to stop reacting to those people pressing your buttons. So the person is saying, will you take me shopping? And you're thinking, I don't feel like it, no. I said I'd go such and such. Oh, all right, so. Now, that person has pressed your buttons because you're feeling at some level, if you were any good, you'd go back into town and bring this person shopping. So you take out these pieces from underneath the keys of the piano and say, I can take you shopping, but it will be next week. So now they're not pressing your buttons. You're not saying, no, I'm not definitely ever going to take you shopping again, but you are showing them you have choice, but you're also giving them choice.
But is this a confidence building decision, or is it choosing to put yourself first and how you're feeling, going with how you feel rather than what you think logically you should do?
You go back to this same story again. It's one of the stories in the book. If your well is overflowing with water, you have water to give away. If your well is practically drained, dry and empty, you can't afford to give away water. So when you stand and you look and say, how am I feeling at the moment now? Am I feeling tired? How do I feel? You know where your well is at. You know if you've water to give away. But if you've been doing this indiscriminately for years, there's definitely very little water left in the well anyway.
So it's a matter of identifying for yourself, asking yourself how much water is left in my well. Trying to identify for yourself, asking yourself, is this the right decision to make right now? Is my well beginning to run dry? Do I need to replenish my own well before I start giving away my energy, giving away my time, giving away my efforts to somebody else?
Yes. And it's amazing how somebody can become ill. We were actually talking about this, how somebody can become ill and go to bed for a fortnight with the flu. That's okay. But you can't go to bed in your head for a fortnight unless you're sick. So it goes back, your children go to school. Ma'am, I'm not going to school. You are. I'm not. You have to go to school. I have a headache. We can go back to bed so. So where do we learn it?
Yeah, we learn little excuses to avoid,
So with the overwhelm, we overcompensate and overcompensate and overcompensate, and then somebody down the road says, will you bring me shopping this evening? Oh no, I'm in bed with the flu.
So sometimes we bring about an illness or whatever in our bodies, really to take a time out, to take a break.
Yeah, we have to get ill to get well.
Yeah. So it's decisions we should make while we're healthy,
Yes.
so that we don't get
have to get ill.
We're actually coming up to Christmas time, and a thought occurred to me of seeing a situation last Christmas where a young child was being given their Christmas presents, but each adult in the room wanted to give this child their present, and look what I've got for you, and here again, and look what I've got for you. And I saw this young child in a state which must have been what we were talking about, this overwhelm, where the child was getting so many presents from all sides, it started to cry.
Yes, and that has happened. It's actually to a friend of mine's child, and the child was only about 4 or 5, and because it was the first child, people had brought so many presents. Half the presents were too big for the child, and he was opening the presents, and all of a sudden he collapsed. Out for the count. They had to call the doctor. The doctor said it was overexcitement, hyperventilation, and overwhelm.
Okay, so that's something for people to watch out for.
A child not to can't cope.
Yeah.
It's all too much.
It's all too much, and then later in life, all too much. You could be working in an office, and everybody wants you to do this, and you agree, and then would you do this also, and would you mind doing this also? Yeah, I think I heard of a number of cases where even at work people take on too much, and then they get ill, they get sick simply from the overwhelm.
The value of themselves depends on how people see them, unfortunately, not on who they are.
And in dealing with this overwhelm, I think you mentioned earlier on, stress reduction exercises may help if you do feel that you're going through this state of overwhelm.
Well, it's like anything. It's how do you help yourself before you start to help somebody else? And again, it's learning to do something like yoga, meditation, any of the self-help techniques that are, you know, in self-healing course, listening to meditation music, getting the heart rate to slow down, just slow down. You know, the heart has a pace to go, and it's like the car. I mean, the car, there's so many miles in the clock. When the miles are up, they're up. So,
Well, talking about the car, it reminds me of something we were again asked about by our viewers, and that is burnout. Are we bordering on burnout as a subject here also? Like, you've got panic attacks, you've got overwhelm, and you've got burnout, which I believe some people may describe burnout as it's like the candle burning out. You're burning yourself out. Is that what burnout is?
burnout would be sometimes nearly borderline depression. Burnout, it can feel like nothing exists. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. Nothing anyone can give the person registered in their being. Anything to take from them doesn't register. It's like there's nothing left to give. Absolutely nothing. It's the person that's burned out, it's like their spirit has left their body, and the body is functioning as a mechanism, but the spirit is not there. And unlike depression, depression can be a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. We can say, I'm depressed, it didn't stop raining all day and the clothes are all wet. Or I'm depressed because I can't go to that concert this evening because I didn't get a ticket. But we're not really literally depressed. Depression, as I said, can be a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. Burnout is more of a feeling of nothingness. It's like a battery that has lost its charge, and no matter how many times you plug it in, it's not charging up. It's like it's drained beyond. There's just the shell of the physical body left for somebody that's in severe burnout. And somebody asked me one time, with burnout, what type of people are prone to burnout? It's mostly, we would find from this work, would be people in the caring professions, people that feel they owe everybody something, and overworking, not knowing how to stop or when to stop. And even though they become ill, they will still go into work. Even though the writing's on the wall, you're not going to last at this pace. They keep going. But when they go into burnout, burnout is one of the most devastating feelings. It is devastating because it's like somebody says, would you like to go to the concert? Oh yeah. But then the light goes out again. Having to get dressed to go to the concert is too much. Somebody say, would you like to come out for a meal? Oh yeah. But no, that's too much. The only thing that for burnout is a lot of rest.
Rest, yeah.
And sometimes the person needs to find their soul again, find their spirit again. You know, where did it start to wane? Where do they begin to lose themselves? Where do they get lost? And people can be out of work with burnout for up to a year. But sometimes it's a multitude of events that lead up to the burnout. It could be a family wedding, it could be a loss, it could be a change of house, it could be a change of job. They're all going on at the one time, but nobody sees that this person is going under because there's 10 people watching one person, or this one person is helping 10 people. So each person thinks that they're the only person that's draining off this battery.
Yeah, but they don't recognize the fact that they're draining this one person. And the person themselves, I presume, is not recognizing the fact that everybody around them is draining them.
No, because they don't know how to stop. They don't know how to stop giving. They may be caring for an elderly relative, for a friend, or medical profession, working all hours, and they actually don't know how to stop.
And so one day it's like their engine just stops.
The engine just packs up.
So would you say that it's a case of overwhelm that gets to a point where they burn themselves out? They've been overwhelmed for so long, not recognizing that they're overwhelmed, and then hit this wall called burnout.
Yes, the one with overwhelm, there's a conscious knowing. These people are annoying me. These people really are getting to me. I am really fed up with this. With the burnout, nothing is registering. When the person in burnout has gone so far, people asking them to do something doesn't even register. They've gone into shutdown.
So should they look at themselves as we've discussed before, as though they're a car, and this car must last 100 years, and they can't replace tires, they can't replace the windscreen, they can't replace the engine, and this car must last them for 100 years. And so would it be advisable for this person to think, or for any of us for that matter, to think of our bodies as a car that has to last 100 years without replacing any parts, and learn when it's time to slow it down and take it easy, and most importantly, a time to switch off your engine in the evening and let it cool down. But how many of us will switch off our engines?
For the person that has gone as far as burnout, it literally means stop everything. Stop thinking. Stop the never-ending chatterbox that gets started in the middle of the night. Why didn't you? If you did, why didn't you? Why could you? You know, all of that. It means the person sits and focuses on meditate on a bird. Sit looking at the birds in the bushes. Try and claim back the connection with the physical world, because it's like the soul, the spirit has left the physical world.
Yeah.
And it's like try and come back in and say, I can look at that bird for half an hour, 5 minutes. I don't have to have something to eat just now. I can go for a walk, but then I may not. That's okay. It's a lot of relearning, but again, burnout, you'd see a lot of the pattern comes from childhood behaviour. Nobody says enough is enough, you've done enough, sit down. Like years going past, in my time, you were never told you've done enough, sit down. I would have a tendency to, the old saying, bop till you drop, keep going. Mm-hmm. When you become ill, then you'll get a rest. Yeah. But that would have been a cultural thing. If you're idle, it's sinful, it's bad. You shouldn't be sitting down doing nothing. Yeah. So, but it's a whole relearning of how we think and how we cope. And it's not just coping, it's learning how to live again. That's the hard part.
Yeah. And learn about respecting the simple things in life and not overdo it, not push ourselves beyond the limits.
Yeah, and it's going back to that, before we even get to an interesting exercise for anyone that watches this podcast is, do you have a car? What year is it? And you go out and you stand looking at it. Is it clean? Are the number plates covered over with muck? Have you been over driving it? is there a red light flashing there for the last couple of weeks? Are the tyres half bald? Are the wipers working? They're your eyes. Is the engine rattling away? Have you been overloading the car? Have you been overloading the seats?
Have you been carrying too many passengers in the car?
Yes. Have you been taking other people's rubbish with you?
Have you been putting cheap fuel into your car instead of good quality
Exactly.
fuel? And putting lots of cold water into it as well.
And the last time the light came on, did you put a nice duster over it so you wouldn't see it? That's denial. But you've only got the one car.
And that has to last you.
And that has to last you a lifetime.
So look after it.
So when you go out tonight, have a good look at the car and say, there's some changes.
That's me.
You may be one of those people that are already doing all of this. But for the rest of us, we do have to look at the car now and again.
Well, look, thank you very much, Patricia, for all of your insight into overwhelm and panic attacks and burnout. And we hope that the viewers will stick with us as we create more and more podcasts in the time to come. And we try to focus on health-related matters, and particularly self-help techniques and information. So from Patricia and myself, John Donoghue, we'll say goodbye for now and hope to see you on the next podcast. And as usual, we'll finish off with a little bit of music. And this is a song which has been written by Patricia and myself, called I Was Born to Be Free. I've been hurt, I've been beaten, I've been treated like a fool, I've been jailed and defeated, like a rebel breaking rules. But I say to those who judge me, who is right and who is wrong? Were they playing God to make me fit in where I don't belong? I was born to be free. I was born to be free, to sail the skies like an eagle, swim like dolphins in the sea, roam the plains like a lion, blow the oceans like the wind. My heart is on fire. I was born to be free. My heart is on fire. I was born to be free.